All right, everyone, welcome back. We are now going to have our drug development roundtable with the panelists that you see listed here, and Elise Qvale is the moderator. So Elise, I will turn it over to you.
All right, perfect. Thanks so much, Nicole, and thank you everyone for joining. And I am thrilled to be joined today by the wonderful panel that you're seeing on the screen. We look forward to having a very good discussion with everyone around drug development and Duchenne muscular dystrophy. As Nicole said, I'm Elise Qvale. I am MDA's Director of Community Education, and we look forward to the next 30 to 45 minutes with you all. I feel Dr. Wong and Maddie's presentations were really great primers for our panel discussion today. And the intent of this discussion is to be able to talk about the drug development process really from all sides. From the clinicians, from the family members, and from the pharmaceutical and biotech industries. So we want this to really be an interactive conversation. So I would encourage you, if you do have questions related to drug development and the process, please utilize the Q&A box to submit your questions. And we are planning to get to as many questions as possible. And with that, I would like to turn the conversation over to our panelists and to give them a minute or two to do an introduction to themselves. Mattia, I know we just heard from you, but do you want to do just again, if we have some new folks joining, just a very brief introduction?
Right, will do. My name is Mattia Quattrocelli. I'm a assistant professor here at Cincinnati Children, where I'm studying my own lab. I'm a biologist. I've always done research in muscle biology, muscle diseases, including Duchenne muscular dystrophy and other muscular dystrophies. And I am boring you today, as I've already done, with a lot of stuff about research and clinical trials.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Ramos Platt, do you want to go ahead and do an introduction?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me on this panel today. I'm Leigh Ramos Platt. I'm a pediatric neurologist. I am the director of the Multidisciplinary Neuromuscular Clinic at Children's Hospital, Los Angeles. And we are in basically the heart of Los Angeles in Hollywood. I don't do a lot of research. I do participate in some sponsored trials, but research is something that we talk to every patient about what's going on and if they do qualify for a particular study. And that's how we integrate clinical trials in our program.
Perfect, perfect. Dr. Kouchakji, would you like to go next?
Yes, thank you for inviting me to this meeting. So it is an opportunity to express our gratitude to the family at the same time who allowed their kids to be in our clinical trials. I've been at FibroGen as heading the clinical development for anti-fibrotic diseases. And Duchenne muscular dystrophy is one of them. And the purpose of these trials, as we know, is to try to bring a new and innovative treatment to help our patients in DMD.
Wonderful, welcome. Well, we're glad to have you here. Brian, how about you?
Yeah, great, thanks. Brian Pfister, I'm with PTC Therapeutics. Definitely glad to be here. I'm the head of US Medical, so everything we oversee, everything from the development side then through marketed products, and get the feedback and interpretation of the use of products in the field to help design better ones. So it's kind of a feedback loop. So I'm definitely excited to be here because I think these type of meetings allow us to identify endpoints which are truly meaningful to families, which I think is what, in clinical research, we're really looking for. How do we improve the lives of families? And these type of meetings are very instrumental in helping us to figure that out.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you for sharing. And with that, Karen, you'll round out our group. Would you like to do a brief introduction?
Hi, my name is Karen Flor. I am the mother of a 20-year-old Lucas with Duchenne muscular dystrophy. Lucas participated in the GSK clinical trial for exon skipping 5 years or so ago, and he has been on Exondys for the last 3.5 years.
Perfect. Perfect. Well, welcome you all. I'm looking forward to our discussion. Before we dive in, just wanted to let the audience know that this panel is really a discussion of thoughts, and no member on this panel is offering medical advice. We want to make sure that that's stated, and that you know that for any specific questions related to you and your care, that should be directed to your primary care team. And lastly, you know, we do intend to talk more in general, kind of on the drug development process. And as you can see, we have, you know, all sides covered. We have our clinicians, we have our researchers, we've got our pharmaceutical partners, and we have our families. So we're looking forward to being able to understand and get a glimpse into the drug development process for DMD from this wonderful group. So to get started, just a reminder, we would love to have questions come in from the audience around drug development. So please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll get to as many of those as started. And I think, you know, Dr. Wong's presentation highlighted that we do have a few drugs that are FDA approved for treatments for certain exon skipping drugs. And Mattia walked through a lot of what's going on, and it's exciting to see that there's 84 active clinical trials going on right now for DMD. I guess to kind of piggyback off of Mattia's presentation, I'd love to hear from this group, from your perspective, you know, what's exciting about the therapies up and coming and on the horizon in DMD?
Ooh.
I know that's a big question.
I can tell you from sorry, Dr.
No, I'd say Dr. Ramos could be in the best place to start this discussion.
Thank you. Coming from a clinician perspective, we are already starting to see some changes just based on the current therapies that we have. So there is a lot of debate about something like Exondys, whether or not it works, it doesn't work. But I can give some anecdotal experience where we have a family of 3 brothers. One of them started when he was 2, and then the other brother started at different times. And I can see that there is such a difference with that 2-year-old that already started therapies. He's doing a lot better. So seeing that improvement already with the current therapies that we have, seeing what's coming down the pipeline, the idea of combination therapies makes it a lot more exciting for us to see what's to come. And some of those discussions that we had, those very difficult discussions, are now going to be not only just peppered, but more full of hope for what's to come in the future.
I think this is a very important point Dr. Ramos is raising. There is for a specific mutation and now a new therapy. Is it sufficient by itself, or we still need additional treatment, supportive treatment, addressing different endpoint or different modality or different aspect of the disease? The whole idea of treating Duchenne at this moment is making this disease is less burdensome on the patient and make it more as a chronic disease and more tolerable. And that's why we would need all these additional new treatment to be included and to be added to the arsenal of tools that this unique aspect of the specialist to be able to use it and assess when it can be used. I think this is a very important part of our clinical development.
Yeah, I would agree completely with that thought. So one of the things that we've seen, from PTC Therapeutics, we've looked at dystrophin-producing drugs. So now we're beginning to lump drugs into categories and types of drugs. So whether they treat the immune system and the inflammation associated with that, or whether they create dystrophin to replace what's lacking. Now we're beginning to see this idea of multi-combinations coming together to treat the different phases of Duchenne. And so ultimately, I think what we're looking at, it's exciting right now, because I know a few years ago when I looked at the pipelines, they were very, very limited. And now people have these very rich pipelines with a lot of different treatment options, which ultimately I think leads to better outcomes for the kids. And so, starting earlier and understanding exactly what type of drug is going to fit well with your type of Duchenne, and even then I think there's subcategories within that based upon mutation types. I think this creates a wonderful opportunity for families to have a lot more options than they had before, but understanding drugs can be used in combination. There might be need to have studies to look at that, to understand what the effects are, because we're targeting multiple different pathways. I think that's what we've learned in the last 4 or 5 years, is all of the pathways involved within DMD. And so there's kind of, we call it target rich, meaning there's a lot of options that we can then focus on to develop drugs. So it's kind of the golden age of DMD right now for drug development.
If I can add something to the discussion, as a biologist, what I think is exciting for me at present with the clinical trials that are now going on and that will give us results in 1 or 2 years, I would say, are 2 questions which are of immediate relevance for Duchenne and other neuromuscular disorders. That is, what is the relationship between immune system and immune system management and muscle disease? This is still an open question. It's decades and decades of studies, and I'm sorry about this. It's my office phone is ringing. Of course, I have to talk about this.
Quite all right. It happens.
So I was saying, the relationship between the immune system and the muscle biology is still basically an open question. And after decades that we study and address Duchenne and other neuromuscular disorders, and the other important concept, I think, is the concept of combined therapies. And this is not a research hypothesis anymore. This is a reality. And the question is pressing: how can we combine? What can we combine in the long term? And like 5 minutes ago, I replied to a question in the Q&A of how to combine, possibly combine gene therapies for mini-dystrophin and GALGT2. That is really an open question. Honestly, there is no way of answering that before having some first initial results with the clinical trials. But I would say more. What really excites me are the perspectives of combining, for instance, gene therapy and exon skipping. Gene therapy, exon skipping, and pathology management with steroids, with novel steroids, with different types of steroids, with combination of steroids and antifibrotic agents, and so on and so forth.
Perfect. And are there currently studies looking at that combined therapy approach happening right now?
So there actually are, and I know it's we're exploring that on the PTC side, but I know also companies like Juvenistat, for example, they have an HDAC inhibitor which works through an inflammatory pathway. They're looking at that in combination with steroids, so add-on therapies. So I think this is what we see is as we look at these meaningful endpoints, ambulation, pulmonary function, cardiac function, as we look at these type of things, we can see the add-on therapies are giving us additional benefit beyond what the baseline therapy would be. So I think that's kind of been the big shift is before we used to think we want to replace these, we want to get rid of steroids. And we understand steroids aren't wonderful. But the benefit that we've seen, they've been one of the things that have worked consistently year in and year out. So we're trying to then figure out how do we lessen that burden by creating additional therapies that can replace that or to do similar things, like what Mattia was saying, is how do we do some of these same type of things, these different types of steroids, different types of inflammatory immune modulating drugs, which can get the job done as well. So they're looking at, I think that more companies are beginning to understand this. And so I think that creates opportunities for families, because some people are like, well, I don't want to go off the drug I'm on to get a potential of getting placebo in a trial. So what do I do? So I think the combination idea, the rational polypharmacy, I think is a great idea in this space.
So I would like to say, if you take a look at FibroGen clinical trial that is in the phase 3 is imminently starting in the non-ambulatory Duchenne, it is a combination with corticosteroid.
Yep.
So that is as we know, corticosteroid is approved, and we think this is important not to eliminate the corticosteroids in this case and see how when you add on an antifibrotic to it. But this is this is the beginning, it's not the end. This is the potential of combination that should be considered. But first of all, we need to get to take a look what's the benefit we get from every single molecule. Then we need to see the safety of that. So when we start to combine them, that is, we can understand how much we're extending this benefit and how much we're affecting the safety. So this way we can address it either by precision medicine. Precision medicine is going to be part of Duchenne. So with a different mutation, this is have to be, so how the combination is going to work have to be assessed closely. So I think it is in mind of all the clinical development researcher at the same time.
Perfect. I think one of the other questions that I think we're interested in exploring a little bit, and Karen, I know you talked about your son being in a clinical trial. I think you would probably be a good person to kind of start this question. You know, as far as your experience, what is that clinical trial experience currently like for folks with DMD?
My son's experience was very good. In a parent's first concern is obviously safety. By the time he got to stage 3, where it was a wider, broad base of group of kids, and we were actually seeing Dr. Wong in Cincinnati at the time, I felt very safe having him try it out. I didn't feel there was any, could be any negatives. They monitored him very well. You know, the companies that worked with you, they provided, it is hard. For example, we live in Florida. We had to go to Cincinnati quite frequently. For a while there, it was every week. You got to pull your child out of school. You have to be able to get out of work. That makes it complicated for a lot of families. My husband and I have more flexible jobs, so we were fortunate that we could do that. But that does make it hard, but the companies involved made it as easy as possible. And like I said, safety being the first concern, we never really felt any doubt. The only thing that was very difficult was when they stopped it instantly without any notification. I actually read about it on Facebook. And my son at the time was benefiting greatly from that trial. So losing it, he was still ambulatory, he was still feeling good, he was making all sorts of progress with the 6-minute walk test and the other parameters that they had to test. It was quite an emotional, detriment to him and to all of us, because we had put almost 1.5 years into it from the time that it started until when GSK pulled the plug. And so there was not necessarily the support I think families need. I mean, you always know, because it's down there in the fine print, this study could terminate at any given time, whatever. But the more it goes on, the more positive effects you're seeing, especially in your own child. To just have a study stop instantly without any real warning and without any psychological backup is a really hard thing for families. It made us very cautious if we were to try another one. Now, fortunately, Exondys got approved and he was able to go on that, which he had lost his ability to walk by that time. However, we can really see the benefit Exondys is giving him through his cardiological exams, because his heart functions are staying the same every single checkup, which for a 20-year-old is impressive. But it's, as far as I said, financially there's support to get you to the city, to pay for a hotel, do that sort of stuff. Safety wise, there's tons of support, but maybe the more emotional parts, especially if something does go wrong, that's where I think there needs to be a little focus. And if I had to critique any part, that would be it.
I would like to comment on this, if you allow me, because this is very important. This is what you do. We understand all the sacrifices that the family does to bring their young men to help in this clinical trial. And without them, that this clinical trial cannot move forward. And we understand this. I understand that the struggle when the study needed to be stopped. We should develop a much better messaging process to inform the family, either through the investigators at this nice physicians who are agreeing to run these clinical trials, So that is an important point you're bringing, Karen. So I think it is on us as to start to think about this emotional aspects of a trial not continuing and succeeding. And at the same time, there is other process we do. This is most of the clinical trial when they stop or when finished, we maintain this open label extension until the drug is approved, if the drug is showing a good benefit. So I think this is give us a lot of good food for thoughts to know how that emotionally could be taxing on the family at the same time.
I think to kind of piggyback off that question a little bit too, I think it'd be good to hear from this group, because I think what we see at MDA and what we hear from multiple avenues is really around, you know, getting families to participate and some barriers to that, because obviously research can't move forward if you don't have participants who are willing to take part. You know, from this group's perspective, what is it that families can really do to help kind of move this needle forward? Where do you see that family participation? And is there knowledge gaps? Is there things you want to see more coming from the families? Would just be kind of curious from your all perspective is really where can the families make the biggest impact in kind of moving this needle forward on research?
I can speak from our experience in our phase 2 study in non-ambulatory Duchenne. We were on the edge of terminating this study, and now we know we did the good things by rethinking that process. And the reason is Karen started by saying we wanted to wait until the drug has been showing some safety before we can allow our kids to get in. But most of the time when we get there, hopefully we had a very good idea about the safety of the molecule, although there is some surprises. But if there is no participation in early trials, we cannot move this program into the phase 3 into an approval. It took us a very long time to enroll 22 patients in this study. Dr. Quvale is a very good speaker about this, and she's a very good supportive of us, that she helped us move the needle forward to maintain the study to move. That is very important that we communicate with the family to bring more knowledge about the molecule, what they can do, and why it's important for them to help moving these new drugs to make it to the final line. We need participants in the clinical trials. We are embarking on phase 3 studies. Now, the longer it takes to enroll the patient, the longer to bring a drug that have a potential of benefit to the market. And that will be a very important tools. While we have other families that we were willing to travel all the way from Alaska to California every 2 weeks to bring their child to attend the study, although we felt that this is a huge burden. We could not open center in Alaska, and we could not take the chances of flying every 2 weeks on these kids with the weather increment during the winters and all of that. That has led to this hard to accept this young man in our study. So I think it is very important that this, I think Brian talked about the communication with the families is important. It is not only to understand their need, what they're looking for, what the endpoint that is we need, but for them, for us at the same time to explain what we are trying to do in this trial and why it is important that we collaborate with them to bring these young men into our study sooner, faster, so we can get the results much earlier. And then don't wait many years until we know as a success or failure.
Yeah, I think you hit that. Oh, go ahead, Dr. Platt. Yep,
so from our perspective, getting families into clinical trials is a little more challenging. And I think it's where we practice. So I practice in urban Los Angeles, and we take all insurances, which means a lot of the patients that we see are government sponsored, and there are days that I don't speak English because of just where we're at. So not all the families are like Karen's family, who sounds very educated education gaps are a big problem with our population to get them into clinical trials. And education in their language, not just Spanish, also Mandarin, Cantonese, Armenian. These are some of the languages that our families speak that there is no particular pamphlet or informed consent in their language. There's a lot of cultural barriers. Yeah, in a lot of these cultures, they are very mistrustful of physicians. They're mistrustful of science. And we have to get through those gaps in order to bring them on board. We have, I have a colleague, I'm very lucky that Dr. Shea at UCLA is about 45 minutes away because he does a lot of clinical trials. But 45 minutes for some of our families, that's a problem. They can't get across town. And if clinical trials were more available throughout rather than just at big centers, that may make it easier for families as well.
Yep, and I was just going to say, like when we look at clinical trials and we look at the length of time that we have to study it to see the effect, you know, I think that's something that we're learning. Originally, when I look back at some of the trials that were done in the 90s, for example, they had a 12-week endpoint. So now as we've done this longer and we've brought drugs to market, we've seen how this works. Within Duchenne, because it's a slow declining disease in a lot of situations, we have to look at this for a long period of time to understand the true benefit and effect of the drug, whether it's dystrophin replacement, whether it's an antifibrotic, whether it's, you know, a cardiac drug that is specifically targeting something or an anti-inflammatory. You have to look at these for a long period of time. So I think what we could do better, so this is kind of where I put on what can we do better. I think we could partner with the families better to help them understand what the expectation for time is. What does participation look like? And even to Karen's point, because I completely understand, I've been doing drug development for 22 years. I understand exactly, Karen, your point. We've stopped them for good reasons. We've stopped them for bad reasons. You know, and it's always good when you stop it and say, yes, it works, let's move forward. But we have to be able to help the families expect and really understand what's going to happen through the course of this trial. Open communication, good partnership throughout, because what they're facing now is the choice of which trial do I want to be in? Do I want to go into a microdystrophin study? Do I want to go into, you know, a gene therapy study, specifically looking at another pathway? Do I want to look at, you know, any of these exon skipping drugs, nonsense mutation treatments? So now you have what we didn't have 20 years ago. Now we have, you know, pick and choose which ones are right. And so I think that's where we have to partner better with the families as a community. Both, you know, the people developing the drugs as well as clinicians and families have to really see what fits best for you and how does this end up benefiting you, and what ultimately at the end is a meaningful endpoint to you. So a 6-minute walk distance to some people may not mean something. To us, it's indicative of a benefit, but we need to end up looking at endpoints that make sense to you as well as a family.
And Brian, I think we've heard that in other drug development roundtables we've done kind of like this, the importance of having the families be part of that development process. It really does help with that buy-in and ensuring things are on target. So I'm glad to hear you say that.
Yep, definitely. Okay, there's so much I've learned. Like I've done a number of different patient meetings with different groups, and we've talked to families and spent time with them. And to understand, like for us clinically what's important and what to them is clinically meaningful or life meaningful, that's the part I'm trying to figure out. So how do we combine both? And how do I manage those expectations to be able to give you better treatment options, you know, in quicker time periods? So that's the challenge, and that's the feedback that you guys give and the families give that's so helpful to us, because it becomes meaningful, it becomes real. And I think that also helps regulatory agencies understand, yes, these drugs do make a difference in lives, and here's what it looks like beyond what you quantify, you know, what I can measure in a trial. Here's what I experience as a family member. I think those are important as well.
Brian, you brought in this very important point, that this collaboration with the patient advocacy group, such as MDA and other organizations that are actively working with the DMD. It is a very important and good tool. But at the same time, this patient advocacy group should start to collect some of this data and share it not only with the developer, but share it more publicly so other family can get this information.
I totally agree. I think that transparency and that openness as a community trying to solve this together, I think is where we have to move forward. That's another area of improvement.
Yep. So we've had a few questions kind of come in through the chat, and I'd like to kind of take a couple from here right now. And something goes to Brian, a little bit of what kind of you were talking about is needing to look at these trials and longer endpoints and things. And this question is really around, at the current moment, are there any kinds of studies or trials or drugs being looked at for those that are 30 years of age or older?
So I think it's a great question because you look at things. We've always learned treating earlier is better, but as we've gotten better at treating, and the clinicians have done a fantastic job of extending life and moving this forward, I think it's something that we need to realistically think about. So and this is something that, as we transition into adulthood, the needs and differences and the things that we're focused on are probably different. As we move forward. So we haven't at our company looked at this yet, but it's something that I think is worthwhile to put on the table, because as medicine moves forward, so too do the needs of the patients and families. So I think we do have to look at it. We haven't yet.
Well, at least we, as you know, our study is a patient of 12 years of age and older. So it's a look into the patient who's entering into adulthood. It is still a question is, how old is too old to end the study, is to be able to prove that difference in benefit and how much deterioration occurred. So that is a very good question, but I think we still are in infancy and start to be able to answer it directly at this moment.
If I may add something to that, the next years to come, we will have some trials dedicated to older Duchenne population. And I think it's going to be based on strategies for fibrosis management, if not fibrosis resolution, inflammation management, for instance, novel steroids, novel molecules, novel combinations. And probably what's going to be most important is new combination of drugs for heart management, for the cardiac management. And that's an important point to consider, is that now that the lifespan is extending, the important, I would say, emergent clinical problem that we need to address is how to manage respiratory problems and cardiac problems in the long term. And I suspect that we will see more and more of these clinical trials dedicated to older Duchenne and possibly the heart management in the few years to come. I'm hopeful, at least.
Perfect. And another question that we have in here, I think, is related to just, kind of the process and that. And, I'd love for this group if they have thoughts on, obviously there are treatments for exon 51 and exon 53, but there are a multitude of other exons. Are there currently treatments being looked at for those other exons? Where are they in the process? At some point in time, do you think there will be treatments for all the different exons that are skipped with DMD?
Personally, I think they will. I mean, when I look at this, I look at, so the greatest thing I think that can happen is when you see a company develop a technology to be able to bridge this and to fix this exon skipping piece. And you see other companies then figure this out as well. So then multiple companies can begin to target this and look at it. I think that creates, I think it opens it up, say, if we did it for exon 54, exon 51, or can we do this for other ones as well? So I think it does create that. Like we're looking at PTC, we have one for nonsense mutation that we're looking at. We have long-term data to show this benefit. So we're like, okay, how do we leverage that we've learned here to again, kind of to do this again in other spaces? How do we tweak it each time? So you're not reinventing the wheel, but you're just perfecting it, right? So as you get closer and further down the road, then you get better medications. And I think that you will get to a point where you're gonna try. I mean, I think that's the thing too, is sometimes failing is okay because we know this didn't work, but maybe there's a better idea. So we'll try, we'll continue to move forward and try to do these things. But that's what I've seen, is just more companies have been dedicated to these other mutation types. And I think that's why it's important to understand early, what is the specific mutation that you have within DMD. right? So then you can understand what may make sense, or I keep an eye out and look for it, you know, as far as what other companies are developing, because it may benefit my child, type of thing.
The exciting thing about the environment of what's being developed now is that there are other exon skipping that is being developed. But what the scientific community for Duchenne has been doing is they're looking at it at more than one approach. So it's not just antisense oligonucleotide, it's not just gene therapy. They're looking at gene editing. They're looking at other ways, like PTC has, they're studying autolurin to try to for that particular mutation. And I think that's very smart and it's very exciting, because if one avenue doesn't work or doesn't work well enough, maybe another one will, or another one will work in combination. And that's the environment that we're in.
I think at the same time, it is important to think about, yes, we need to think about other exon skipping mutation, but we need to start to think about the product that can work on, I will say universally, with all the different mutation. That would be an important process that we need to start to think about, especially from our researchers, to start to take a look. If there is any specific aspects that we can help us develop a more product that can work universally with all the mutation.
All right. Another question that came in, and I know that this is very top of mind, and we're honestly working on a Facebook Live interview around this as well, but obviously COVID-19 has impacted everything in our lives. And the question is, with technology and COVID-19, can't trial coordinators make it easier so that it can be specific labs taken in local analysis so that families don't travel every week across the country? So I'd love just this group's thought on the impact COVID's having on, you know, trials and development, and, you know, what are you seeing long term? Is there possibilities for doing more of this local work?
We actually have, so I'm in California, and we have a patient that has to fly in from Hawaii. Obviously, that's not happening. So the companies have actually been very good about making some changes to their policy regarding COVID-19. Some of our patients, because they can't come to our infusion center every week, it's kind of scary, especially that we do accept the COVID positive pediatric patients, and I get that. They made rearrangements to have that delivered at home. And our patient from Hawaii gets his labs and is monitoring in Hawaii, and I'm doing telehealth visits with them. And they put that into their protocol to allow for that in this time.
We're kicking off at PTC, we're kicking off a committee to look at this and say, how do we leverage telemedicine in a way to make it easier? Because we look at it, especially when people tend to lose ambulation, it's a lot harder to get into the physician's office in certain situations, or like as you mentioned, Dr. Ramos Platt, you know, it's hard for them to get in if they're far away. But is there a way, can we leverage certain things, whether it's wearables, whether it's new technologies, you know, that can be put in the home to look at movement, to understand, you know, what type of distance are we seeing declines, are we seeing stabilization? All these things I think are realistic now. And I think COVID, this is the silver lining of such a horrible situation, is it's really pushed us to say, how do we think outside the box and fix this? And how do we make this opportunity, you know, for more people to have access to treatment, to be in clinical trials, to understand what goes on, but also then do we set up, you know, opportunities for families to continue to monitor progress and understand how they're responding to medication. So I think telemedicine is really come to the forefront of this, and I think we can leverage it and we can figure out how to do it effectively.
So one of the things we are doing, we are changing our method of how we administer the drug. Our drug is an IV, and the patient have to come to the sites every 2 weeks. Now we are looking into the home infusion as a process. That is included in our next phase 3 studies. Of course, this is require, again, collaboration with the sites. Dr. Ramos is doing some of this telemedicine, but when you are trying a product for the first time, many of them, they will insist that these visits must have happen at the sites. At least a few of them is early. So it is a method of the adjustments that we needed to do. And I think as it looked like as COVID so far is staying with us longer than what we hope that will. and we need to continue to adjust for this. We will minimize the number of the sites at the visit to the site where they're required to collect a specific endpoint data, where it's needed to be more well controlled. So yes, I think as COVID is pushing us to be more innovative in thinking outside the box, how to minimize the potential exposure of our young, especially they are on corticosteroids. So it is true, it is a new era that we need to move into.
You made a good point about that. So when you're looking at your endpoints, especially if it's something like dystrophin expression, so you may have to do that via a punch biopsy or a needle biopsy. You can't really do that remotely. I mean, as much as we'd like to, the FDA is saying, we have to do it at one location, that everybody's doing it the same way, so there's no, question of variability being brought into it. So to your point, some endpoints are just, there's no way around it. But we look at it and say, to your point, maybe we can make it easier in between. So maybe instead of coming into the clinic every week or every 6 weeks, you come in maybe every quarter. And so you're reducing the amount of time travel to make it easier. But yeah, the endpoints are going to be what they are. And I know Mattia is probably looking at, when you're looking at the muscle tissue, there's only one way to look at it. So I agree.
Yeah.
I'm Scott. My son's clinical trial was 8.5 years ago, so it was obviously way pre-COVID. But the first initial visits, the way they set it up, the first initial visits were at Cincinnati. We traveled to Cincinnati every week. And then we hit a certain plateau where we were able to just go once a month. Obviously, even without COVID in the picture, that makes it more accessible for families to participate in different studies if they don't have to get on an airplane every single week, even with its health, when it was safer. Now my son's left the house twice since March. So I would definitely understand where families would not want to travel at this time. But, if even 8.5 years ago, when we were not in the middle of a pandemic, they could figure out how to incorporate some home nurses and treatments and infusions at home and all that sort of stuff, it makes sense that now, with all the pressing need for safety, that that could be expanded on somewhat.
Makes sense. So I think to wrap up, there was one question in here that I think is pretty applicable and a good reminder for everyone listening that I don't think we've necessarily covered too fully yet. It's just, how do patients get connected to what's going on in the drug development space? Where do you all recommend people go to look for that? I obviously have thoughts from the MDA side, and I'm happy to share those after, but would love all of your thoughts on, where do you want to direct people when they need that information and when they want to know what's going on in the drug development space?
I'll go first on this one with a quick comment, because I just replied to the question in the Q&A.
Perfect.
My suggestion is always Clinicaltrialgov. It's a website that is instituted by the government. All the clinical studies are listed there, and all clinical studies have the status, what they're investigating, the eligibility criteria, and especially the official contact information. So that's always the most valuable resource. Now, the question was actually intriguing, because it's true that a number of times you try to contact these study researchers and you don't get an answer, or you get an answer only after a lot of time, and that is not okay. That's when I think the MDA does an awesome job. And I really encourage all the families, all the patients, everyone who's involved in this, to contact and participate in the MDA more, and to actually contact the MDA advocates to ask how and whether they can help in favoring this communication. Because I know firsthand, I participate to MDA conferences. I have been supported by the MDA in my second postdoctoral period. I am still working with a lot of MDA-backed researchers and MDA-backed research environments. And I know for a fact that the MDA strives to favor this communication. Actually, if anything, it's the seminal idea behind the MDA.
I support what you said, that everybody could start with clinicaltrial.gov. The issue is all the families are aware of clinicaltrial.gov. I said, we start to be reminded with the cultural differences in education gaps. This is where the patient advocacy group, in our role to be engaged with all patient advocacy group. Every group of family attended different patient advocacy group. At the same time, the Duchenne muscular dystrophy's families are well connected to each other's. It is one of the things that we believe in. It is and our senses is working. They talk to each other's. So we have to continue to spread the news about our clinical trials within this venue. I support clearly what you said, Mattia, that is about the collaboration with these patient advocacy groups is way important as a messaging tool for us to bring to the family the knowledge. Now the question will be always, when they go on clinicaltrial.gov, they contact these sites, in the delay of receiving this response or non-responders at all. That is an issue we face clearly, and we hear about it regularly. That is something we need from the medical community, our colleagues who are now practicing. I did practice for a long time, and I did clinical trials before. And I understand that the burden of clinical trials at the same time. It is not only on the family, even on the practitioners, on the sites. But at the same time, these patients, they're calling because they feel they want to contribute. There is an altruistic donation in here that is incredible. That these young men are willing to accept a product that is not proven yet to work. So that is a very important message that we need for. This is not one-sided. It's not only clinicaltrial.gov. It's not only the advocacy group that's such as an MDA, and you're doing a great job on doing this. We need the medical community at the same time to support the family.
And that's what we do. The clinicaltrial.gov, I agree, it's a great resource. But that's a resource that our team also looks at. So that before every clinic, before we see that patient for their yearly multidisciplinary MDA-sponsored center clinic visit, we are looking at that website to see if it fits one of our patients. Because you're right, there's an education gap in our particular population. And it really does fall on the medical physicians. And if the medical doctors are not bringing it up, at least whoever is in charge of that particular center, whether it be the neurologist, the physiatrist, or in some cases the pulmonologist, then I think the parents and families should be pushing us to do that, because that is now a very, very important part of the clinic visit.
Yep, I agree with that. We have, within PTC, we have a dedicated group only to patient engagement. So, and that's part of the reason I'm here today, is they've worked so closely with MDA, and we had this opportunity to speak about what we're doing. But they go out and they have weekend meetings, and we're able then to share what we're doing to give people an opportunity to see what PTC have coming down the road, what might fit with what they have. We've seen other companies do the same thing. And I think it works out pretty well. But again, anything we can do to connect people with the right trials at the right time, I think is critical.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so many different factors, and I'll just piggyback on and thank you all for kind of sharing all of those perspectives. In addition to clinicaltrial.gov, MDA does have a clinical trial tools finder to try to make it a little bit easier to find trials. We know clinicaltrials.gov can oftentimes be a little bit overwhelming, so our clinical trial tools finder asks you a few questions, and then it specifies down those trials that would fit for you. So also encourage you to check that out. But the other place is MDA rolled out a couple months ago a Quest newsletter that comes out around the middle of the month. That comes out electronically to all of the families connected with the Muscular Dystrophy Association. And we also do our best to highlight new trials that we find out about in there as well. So, so we definitely do want to be a resource. Our resource center also is a great place to connect with if you have questions on those as well. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for families to find out about clinical trials. It's just getting them to the right place. And Dr. Ramos Platt, to your point, really getting them connected with their doctors to talk about what trial is the best for them and that fits the best for their situation. All right. Well, with that, this has been a very quick 45 minutes, but I know we have reached our time. So I would just like to thank each of you who have joined me today. Thank you so much for your time. I think this was a wonderful conversation. And I think with everything, it's so exciting that, you know, we're in a spot now that we're talking about combined therapies, and we're talking about adding additional exons, you know, to what we're looking at. I mean, it really, truly is an exciting time in the DMD realm for what's going on drug development, research, trials. But as we've heard and all of you have said so eloquently, it does take all of us working together to get there. And I think this helps reiterate that each person, it doesn't matter what your role is, whether you're a family, whether you work for the development, whether you're the researcher, whether you're the doctor, it takes everybody working together to make this happen. So I'm glad that we were able to really kind of get that point shared here today. So with that, Nicole, I'll turn it over, but thank you all for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Elise. That was a lot of great information shared. We are going to take a quick break and be back at 20 till the hour. And next we will hear about genetic testing. So thank you very much, and we'll be right back.